magic virus, and I'm not saying that there wasn't serious disease, and I'm not saying people weren't getting sick, and I'm not saying we don't have to deal with this, but I assure you the bigger play was a financial reengineering that has absolutely nothing to do with healthcare.
This week, it is really my honor to be joined by somebody that understands the financial system the way many don't. She was a former secretary or assistant secretary of HUD in the United States of America, former managing director and member of the board of directors of Dillon Read and Company Incorporated, president of Solari, a great website, solari.com, that gives a lot of information. I am joined now by none other than Catherine Austin Fitts. So, I want to start sort of in your wheelhouse. When we look at banking, one of the things I hear a lot about is central banking and the central reserve banking system and how all of that is really what is controlling the world and we're not paying attention to it. And what do we mean when we say central banking as far as,
So central banking is a critical bureaucracy in controlling and managing the financial system. So the financial system I would describe as part of the governance system. So one of the ways you govern the entire planet is through the financial system. And there are very important bureaucracies within that financial system. And the one at the top of the food chain is central banks. But it's not just central banks, because think of the planet like a house. You have a mortgage, that's the banks. You have equity, that's the intergenerational pools of capital. And then you have the asset, the house. And so the insurance industry is important, the banking industry, insurance, everybody knows their house is only, their equity in their home is only worth something if the insurance is good, right?
Right.
So you have these different industries and they're all players, but there's no doubt that the fundamental model that we've been operating on for all of our lifetimes is called the central banking warfare model. The central banks print money and the military makes sure that people use it. And they basically police the model. And what has been happening now, and it's been ongoing for 20 years, is we are coming into a significant change in both the governance and the financial model. So the currency system is in flux globally, and that's part of what's happening. It's part of why there's a demand for a reset. In anticipation of this, though, for the last 20 or 30 years, the central banks have been moving significant money out of the sovereign governments. So we have known for many decades that there was going to be a problem when the baby boomers retired. And the reality is the central banks have moved that money out of the government. I call it the financial coup. And there's been tremendous funny business going on with federal accounts in the United States for a long time. And we're now in the consolidation where if all that money has been moved out of the government and the retirees want it, you need an excuse as to why it's not there. Enter the magic virus. So from a financial standpoint, COVID-19 is helping provide the air cover for the fact that many of the promises that have been made are not going to be kept.
So just to be clear, this $21 trillion or so that is suddenly missing, it was once there, right? It's not that these retirement programs and pensions didn't have funding in the banks. What you're saying is essentially it's been stolen. Why would someone steal that? Why would you put yourself in that? Is it
why
truly...
not?
Okay.
But so it's a whole nother conversation to talk about the growth of the national security state. Because starting in 47 and 49, we started to build what's called a black budget and a national security state that was secret. And part of that development meant that one part of our society started developing very powerful technology behind walls of secrecy that made fantastic amounts of money and really began to build literally a separate civilization. So, for example, when I worked in Washington or I worked in Wall Street, you would literally go back and forth between the official reality and reality. And official reality with those walls of secrecy increasingly became like Disney World. So if you go to Disneyland, Dell, I don't know if you've ever been underground, but there's this world underground that's sort of engineering everything, and then you have Disney World above. And increasingly, when you worked at the top of Wall Street or the top of Washington, you would have to go back between Disney World and the real world, and the worlds have gotten separate further and further apart. And one of the reasons they've got further and further apart is we have a federal budget that's been financing both worlds. And the secret world has been getting more and more powerful, more and more expensive. And now what we're watching with COVID-19 is they're breaking back in. I mean, they're basically coming in and saying, okay, we're not going to explain anymore. We're not going to keep this wonderful Disney World going. We're just going to take control, and now you're going to do what we say. Here's what you need to understand. The Western democracies in the United States have been run with a two-pronged financial system. On one side, you have private banks with the central bank, the Federal Reserve, who are managing monetary policy. On the other side of the house, you have an electorate voting for representatives who manage the tax flow and the credits that relate to that, so the treasury market. So you have this balance of power between the people and the bankers. And now what is happening under the guise of COVID-19 is the bankers have decided they no longer want to share power with the electorate or the people's representatives. And whether through FASB 56 or levering the governments up so they're deeply in debt and dependent on the central banks have decided essentially to take over. And the ultimate sort of completion of this will be when they introduce digital currencies controlled and operated by the central bank. Why is that important? Because they won't be currencies, Del. They will be a financial control system. To implement that system, they need the vaccine passports. And the goal of the vaccine passports have nothing to do with health. They have to do with implementing a new digital financial transaction system, which is in essence complete control. So I call it a slavery system. Dr. Naomi Wolf said, vaccine passports are the end of human liberty in the West, and she's absolutely right.
So when you say digital currencies, at many of these events I've been speaking at, many of my friends are, big on Bitcoin or Ethereum, saying this is our way forward. This is how we set ourselves free. This is how we break free of those power mongers running the world. And it sounds like you're saying, no, that's exactly how they finish the death blow.
This is not what the central bankers are planning. And I sent your staff a 56-second of the video of the Bank of International Settlements General Manager Carstens explaining exactly what it meant.
Okay, we've got
Can you play
it.
it?
Yeah, let's play it. Let's see what they said. Okay.
Our analysis on CBDC, in particular for the use of general use, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash, and there is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also we will have the technology to enforce that. Absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also we will have the technology to enforce that. Those two issues are extremely important, and that makes a huge difference with respect to what cash is.
So this is what this means. You will no longer have a currency. You will have a credit at the company store. If they don't want you traveling more than 5 miles from your home, your credit card, your bank account won't work more than 5 miles from your home. If they don't want you, let's say they decided you shouldn't be able to buy pizza, you can't buy pizza. You're talking about complete control, at a very intimate level of both surveillance, because remember, there's no privacy. They'll be able to track every transaction you make. So we're talking about a credit at the company store and literally a slavery system.
And you think, based on, so Bitcoin, so then what is Bitcoin? Is that, or, and the other cryptocurrencies that we talk about, are you saying central banks are going to take on cryptocurrencies themselves, or are they going to take over Bitcoin, or exactly what is we going to see?
So central banks, right. So central banks would issue their own central bank digital currency.
Okay.
And the question is, would the regulators increasingly regulate cryptocurrencies, which I think the answer is yes. Will they allow them to coexist? Maybe. But if you look at the way the system will be implemented, you'll find that the vast majority of retail transactions will end up being in the CBDC system. So this is the Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies have been very useful to help the central bankers prototype how they might want to run their systems. So they've been very useful as a prototype. Whether they're allowed to continue or exist, big question mark. I think at the end of the day, the central banks are basically planning on being the dominant player in the market.
So
It's a control system. This is a re-engineering. So here's the question, Del. If I'm the central banks and I'm basically going to destroy the sovereignty of governments and the power of the electorate to affect the budget, the question comes down to how am I going to collect taxes if the electorate has no power and doesn't feel like they're sharing in the financial system. And the way you do that is with a CBDC system. You can just take the money out of the account. This is taxation without representation.
You referred to Mr. Global. I mean, I always say sort of the cosmic they. I keep hearing my friends always saying they are doing this, they. And many times I feel like we give they way too much credit as though they're these masterminded geniuses that have really thought this down the road. Who is Mr. Global or the they in your mind when you make that reference?
So in my mind, let's go back. If you look at the people who govern and manage this financial system, so the owners of the central banks, the people who manage the intergenerational pools of capital, the people who manage the insurance industry, if you look at how the financial system works, at the heart of making the financial system go is risk management. So it's all the people throughout those different bureaucracies who's responsible. Now, one of the decisions that is clearly evidenced by what is happening now, which is called the Going Direct Reset, which is a plan voted on by the central bankers in August 2019, and the takedown of the economy, including the pandemic, rolled out as a result of the Going Direct Reset.
Wow.
If you look at that group, they have decided to radically centralize control into a much smaller group of people. And that's one of the reasons why what you're watching is a destruction of the small business economy in a way, and a printing of money by the central bank. So basically the private equity firms can engage in a shopping spree to pick it all up cheap, which is why, the billionaires are getting richer and richer and richer. What you're watching is what George H.W. Bush used to call consolidating the wealth into tighter and righter hands. So this is a plan. It is being engineered. I'm not saying it's 100, they kind of make it up as they go. But if you look at who's responsible at the very top of the global financial system, they are in the room. If you look at the list of participants for the vote for the Going Direct and the people who put the plan together working for BlackRock, you can see a lot of those players. Now, if you look at the whole Going Direct, to get the financial control system into place with the passports, you need the pharmaceutical industry, you need the tech industry, you need the telecommunications industry. It's all part of putting together the smart grid, because the smart grid is the hardware and the infrastructure for this financial control grid.
I was thinking about that. Austin has been really at the forefront of smart grids. I have a friend that lives in a neighborhood where there's a camera on every light through the area, and every piece of his toaster has a camera on it. His refrigerator has a camera on it. He finally recognized that maybe that wasn't the best idea. But so I look at New York, right? We've lost 25% of the population left New York City, and I guess Cuomo didn't seem to care. Of course, now he stepped down. But on the other side, there's also sort of and I can imagine that. So if they're buying up properties, but then when we look at the jobs, one of these things that's really been crazy to me is this idea that we're hearing, and I go into restaurants now, and I think we've all recognized the service in America. I mean, and I spent 20 years waiting tables before I finally, got my career to take off. So I know a lot about waiting tables, and I can tell you personally, the service industry is flailing. It's like we never knew how to work a restaurant before, but many of the servers are complaining to me, we're understaffed today. We just don't have enough staff, so bear with me today. And you see that. You feel like the food coming out, that's not your usual short order cooks back there. It's like someone's trying to do it for the first time, and we're hearing
one of the things
that they're at home making more money not working, but taking government assistance. So what's happening there?
Right, because essentially we've reached a point in the economy where it is cheaper. basically pay everybody to not work and shut down all the small business. Small business is the bedrock of democracy. And if you're going to wipe out democracy, you want to wipe out small business. And the best way to wipe out small business is to make sure that their labor supply has an alternative other than going to work. And so
Right.
part of what we've been watching is sort of different prototyping on how you're going to buy everybody out of the small business labor force. And part of this, if you're going to institute a new kind of digital transaction system like the one I'm discussing, what is essential for control is, first the dollar's on a gold standard. It's been on an informal oil standard. I think what they want is they want control of the food supply. And small restaurants provide a very significant market for small farmers away from the big industrial food system. So there is clearly a desire to wipe out the small business industry if they can. It's all part of taking complete political control. So it's a lot of people, and there is no doubt that the US government and the central banks have been absolutely instrumental in creating massive incentives to get everybody to play. That's the magic secret here, Del, and it's something you hear a lot sort of embedded in your interviews and presentations at the Highwire. We're building the prison. In a highly centralized system, Mr. Global is not a lot of people, and yet if you look at who's building the train tracks for the control grid, it's all of us.
Right.
Which means, we have the power to stop banking with them. We have the power to stop associating with them. We can snub them on the street. We don't have to buy their stocks. We don't have to go work in the companies. You can make a list of the 20 companies who are the most instrumental in making this all go. We don't have to support them.
And when you
If 5
say,
to 10%
yeah.
of the people just walked out tomorrow, and we have to do it before the vaccine passports go into effect, because once you get CBDCs and vaccine passports, essentially you've got at a very central level, as Mr. Carson's implied, you've got complete control.
So the vaccine passport, which is already, some version of it is already seems to be infecting the politics of New York and in California. We're seeing those discussions around the world. France heavily involved. And that's what really sort of set me off and wanting to talk to you. This is the first time ever where every government seems to be in on it. Like the whole world is aligned. As I've said, this is a world war by every government of the world against the citizens of the world. But very quickly, when you say companies we should avoid, I mean, what companies, like, can you name a few? I mean, I'm not even sure, like, in what
so
realm are they?
there's 21 trillion missing from the US federal government. Okay?
Okay.
The US federal government bank accounts are run by the New York Fed, who's owned and whose member banks operate as agent as the depository for the US government. So if you look at the largest banks who own and operate the New York Fed and run the government financial statements and financial system and bank accounts, they're responsible. So if 21 trillion is missing, they affected a great deal of illegal transactions. They're responsible. Why are we banking with them? Pull your money out.
Who? I'm with Chase. I got some of my accounts in Chase. Is Chase one of them?
Get your money out, Del. You're financing your enemy.
Really? Bank
Yep.
of America? Wells
So
Fargo?
I'll tell you a story.
Okay.
In 1998, I was writing a check on JP Morgan Chase, private wealth, and I froze and I realized, why am I banking at the very bank that is engineering all the mortgage fraud? I need to come clean. And it took me 2 years to get my companies and myself I was in JP Morgan Chase and Citibank, and it took me several years. So, we need to stop financing. I was raised and trained, never finance your enemy. This is war.
Sure.
Don't finance your enemy.
Right.
That's simple.
So is
let me
a
give
credit union, where do we go? I mean, what is the move I make today if I walk out of here?
If you go to Solari and you do a search for how to find a good local bank, I have an article, and it walks you through the process of how to find a good local bank or credit union. And a lot of what you're looking for is, what is the institution that has good governance, good ownership, good management, and has a demonstrated record of really caring about the people in that community. Their business is banking. Their business is not trading derivatives on Wall Street.
Okay.
And they're right now, Figure you've got 4,000 to 5,000 of those in the United States. And if the more they shrink down, the less freedom we'll have. You know, the best thing for the small business economy is a healthy infrastructure of good banks and credit unions in your community. So get your money out of the big banks and head into them, but do it in a way that's good for you. Because Dal, you deserve a bank that really cares about you and is, you know, and is clean. And so I don't know if you've ever looked at the Madoff fraud, but that's a perfect example of why you never want to bank with JP Morgan Chase, in my opinion.
When you talk about sort of the consolidation of wealth, you're mentioning, you know, private business, small businesses. Through this COVID, this weird thing happened. For the first time in the history of any virus that we know of, we locked down the healthy people. We locked them in their houses. We kept them from being able to go to work. We shut down businesses all across the country.
No, I have to stop you, Del.
Okay.
And I'm going to grossly oversimplify. We shut down the businesses owned by Main Street. The businesses owned by BlackRock kept trading and were able to suck up the market share.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have two classes of business. We shut you down. Everybody has to go shop at my store. They can't go shop at your store. They have to go shop at my store. So what happens? My stock goes up, right? That's how I get wealthier. That's how all these billionaires get wealthier. I mean, we literally saw at one point Andrew Sorkin on, I forget what program is he on? Rick Santelli got in a huge fight with Andrew Sorkin. He said, why are we shutting down Main Street when Costco is literally in the same shopping mall and it's open and there's no problem? And Andrew Sorkin said, that's the science. So he was basically saying the magic virus will not attack it if it's owned by BlackRock and Vanguard and Fidelity. What?
Wow.
So the big publicly traded corporations stayed open and made a fortune because the business had to consolidate into them, whether it was online business or the big box stores. So this was disaster capitalism writ large, and it was unbelievably profitable because they were able to pick up enormous amounts of market share for free. And of course, that market share they get to keep. Now it gets even better because if the central banks are printing money and the private equity firms can pick that up, then they get to go buy your real estate cheap, right? You're forced to sell.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Going into foreclosure, can't run my business. I have a restaurant, not allowed to have customers.
Right. So the magic virus, and I'm not saying that there wasn't serious disease, and I'm not saying people weren't getting sick, and I'm not saying we don't have to deal with this, but I assure you the bigger play was a financial reengineering that has absolutely nothing to do with healthcare. Healthcare is the marketing plan for the reengineering of our governance and financial systems. This is a coup. In 1995, an effort was made to get the federal budget in balance, including the retirement obligations. And when it failed, it was described to me by one of the largest pension fund leaders in the country. He said, you don't understand, they've given up on the country. They're moving all the money out starting in the fall, which was fall 1997, when the $21 trillion started to disappear. Here's the reality. If this is the law of math and actuarial science. If you cannot get a financially responsible solution to your retirement benefits, then you have two choices. You can increase the retirement age or you can lower life expectancy. It's pure math. If you can't get the money, then you have to lower life expectancy or you have to raise the retirement age. And if you look at what happened after the budget deal failed, it's what I call the great poisoning. We started a process where in America, we significantly increased toxicity levels and we significantly lowered immune system strength. And we've seen life expectancy steadily falling in the United States, particularly in lower income groups. And that's what we're going to continue to see. It's a combination of many different things, as you know, because you've covered health, for years. So I don't need to tell you. We're bringing down life expectancy and it's engineered.
when you look at, this last year, things outside, not only do we have a pandemic, this supposed disease, which I agree with you, there are issues with it. It may even be a bioweapon or toxic, substance that was created in laboratories. I think most of the science points there. But outside of the science, other weird things were happening. At the same time we're all suffering, trying to get through this pandemic, we had like this revolt, these racial issues taking place in this country, where one of the things I was confused by is I'm all about, freedom of humanity. I believe that everybody should be treated equally. I think we should fund neighborhoods and things that don't have funding to make sure that we all get a sort of an equal start in this world. But when we watch the government or those that were running to be in government supporting what looked like, dramatic attacks on cities like Seattle and, fire bombing, police precincts and flames, when you were watching that, did you see that as a natural occurrence, or do you feel like that's a part of maybe this consolidation of funds?
So the riots tended to happen in the cities where you had a New York where you had a Federal Reserve Bank. And if you look at where the riots were, I would describe them as a real estate acquisition plan.
Really?
So a lot of them occurred in opportunity zones, which are tax shelters. And if you're going to build out the smart grid, the place you want to build the smart grid out for the CBDCs is in the cities and the areas that have a Fed bank. So if we created a database at Solari and mapped out some of the riots, and what we found was there was an extraordinary correlation between the Fed banks and the opportunity zones and where the riots were. So to me, the patterns, I worked as an assistant secretary of HUD, and we saw very similar patterns in the mortgage fraud. So I would say that the riots were primarily an op, and I would say that they were probably designed to facilitate picking up lots of real estate cheap in the areas where they most want to build out the smart grid first, is my guess.
So as we see that we're starting to sort of leak our way back into lockdowns, are you under the impression that the land grab isn't over? They didn't get enough, they didn't kill enough jobs and put enough people on some sort of universal...
The land grab has just begun.
Really?
The land grab has just begun, because the way to make money on new technology is the capital gains on real estate. So one of the reasons they're pushing so hard to lower the home ownership rate is so Wall Street can pick up all the properties and use them in sort of rental industries and rental businesses. So remember when Klaus Schwab says it's 2030 and you have no assets and you'll be happy, what he's saying is it's 2030, we will have stolen all your assets and we're going to mind control you.
Wow.
Unfortunately, Del, we've had a process, and it started with the Kennedy assassination, where the more they get away with, the less they respect the average person. And it's reached a very dangerous point, because you have the average person can't fathom that the governance system has grown this far away from them. So they can't fathom it, and the people at the top can't fathom that they can get away with this. And they're very pleased that they can.
Okay, so super enlightening, and I could talk to you probably all day, but let's get into some solutions. I mean, this all sounds really terrifying. We're just simple people, trying to get through the day. We are now seeing, I showed earlier, people standing up at school board meetings, recognizing that they want to voice an opposition. How do we actually oppose this potential takeover of democracy in our republic here in America?
So the good news is, the bad news is we're on our own, but the good news is if we know that, we're on our own and we can take action. And it doesn't take everybody taking action. It takes a small group of people. The first thing you can do is start using cash. Okay. The less the system goes to all digital, the harder it's going to be to sort of move it into the CBDCs. CBDCs are going to take time. It's not going to happen this year. It's going to take them time. So the more we can dig in and go back to cash, the better.
Okay.
If we can decentralize, if you go to so we have Cash Friday.
Okay.
So if you can't use cash every day, let's use cash on Friday.
So all we have to do is commit to at least one day, all of us, the millions that are watching the High Wire and all the other programs that are out there, and everyone you're talking to, let's take Friday to make sure we don't touch that plastic. Leave it in your wallet.
Right.
Don't pull out the iPhone and slap the little, beeping
Right.
tap payment, but actually pull out some cash and make them. And frankly, I think it's really good just for those young people that are working the registers to make them be involved with math, at least just a little bit more than they are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The second thing is in almost every county in America, the 3,100 counties, you still have great community bankers and credit unions. And the problem is not that we're financing the bad guys. The problem is we're not financing the good guys.
Okay.
And it's been amazing over the last 20 years. The small community banks and credit unions have been able to stop a lot of crazy stuff and a lot of crazy Fed policies. So if we start shifting our money to them, the more money we flow into them, the more powerful they become in the system, the more they can help us circulate money locally. And there's a lot of very powerful literacy and intelligence in that group, and they don't feel like they're being supported by us. So, get your money out of the big banks and get it into the good local small banks. The third thing is, for heaven's sakes, build resiliency. The more resiliency we can have within our family or within our community. I once had a client who would complain to me about the fact that the yields on her portfolios were going down and her water bill was going up. I said, this is if you lived in a rural area. I said, sell some stock and build a well.
Right.
Do it. Get the big corporations out of your income statement, just get them out. And it's funny, I told you the story of when I said, I've got to come clean. We have an article up at Solera called Come Clean, and you can walk through it and go through many of the different steps you can do to come clean. But one of the things you can do to come clean is get any institution, any company that has no integrity out of your lives. Stop shopping there, stop supporting them, stop helping them, stop donating money to them. Just get them out of your life. Start building your life around more solutions. One thing we all need to do is we need to build local food systems. And one of the reasons we need to protect ourselves on the local food system, inflation is coming. I mean, inflation is here, but it's really coming.
Okay.
So, and the more you can do for yourself or do locally with other people, the more you'll be protected from that inflation. So I would go to Solera and check Coming Clean. There are many solutions, Del, and all we have to do is stop building we're building our own prison. Just stop building it.
Amen. Stop funding our enemies. Stop building our own prison. And I know all of us. I'm listening right now, and I already know what I need to cut from all I feel is the inconvenience that's going to be. The inconvenience.
No, here's the little secret here. The first thing is, don't feel badly about it. It's a journey.
Okay.
Just start doing it, but do it in a way that gives you energy. Okay. One of the things I'll tell you, it took me 2 years to move the companies and myself out of the big banks and to switch my purchases. And one day, it took me about 2 years, I woke up and suddenly my life felt so much better because all those people were out of my data. They weren't getting my data. They weren't getting my purchases. And suddenly everybody I was doing business with, I loved. It was great. There is a way to go about this, which is fun and which is energizing. And, go spend money at the great local stores and do business in cash. If you go to the Solera report, we have something called the Gold and Silver Calculator, because one of the secrets here is we don't need central banks, Del.
Right.
If you look at what they do, the governments could issue the currency. We don't need central banks. It's a huge, expensive infrastructure that adds, that permits a whole world of money to stay secret. It's really about protecting the secrecy. But we can decentralize. And if you go to Solera, we have the Gold and Silver Calculator. And I just tell people, take the Gold and Silver Calculator and just start transacting. Use your gold and silver. Just do it. You don't need bylaws. You don't need an organization. You don't need to have a conversation. You just need a group of companies and families to just start, let's use our gold and silver.
All right. Well, Catherine, I want to thank you for taking the time. That's great advice. And obviously, everybody, I'm going to get out of here and go check out Solari.com. Really, I want to read about how to do that. Knowing you were coming on, my wife and I started having the conversation this morning. I need a new bank account. She's like, we've got to stop using Chase. And so just how do I mean, when you say I got to research it, do I use Yelp? Where do I go if I'm looking at a credit union? You said make sure that they're good to the people. How do I find out that information?
So there are a couple ways you can do it. First of all, they're bank rating services, and you can look in your area. So for Austin, Texas, you can determine through the bank rating systems what the banks in your areas are, particularly the ones that they rate highly. And their ratings are useful, but they're not always perfect. And so the first thing I would do is I would do that. And the other thing is I would go to the Chamber of Commerce and see what the local banks are who are members of the chamber.
Okay.
And so between the bank rating services and the chamber, you'll be able to find a pretty healthy group, particularly in Austin, Texas. And then I would start to ask around. I would talk to CPAs, I would talk to attorneys, I would talk to people sort of in the money business locally and say, who do you think is the best local bank or credit union? And you're going to get, probably in Austin, you're going to get down to a short list of maybe 5 locations. And one of the things you want to do is you want to read their governance documents and financial statements. So you want to know who owns them. You want to know who's on the board. You want to know who the managers are. And then you want to walk in and talk to them. It's amazing how much just walking into the bank and talking to the people and getting a sense for what it would be like to have a relationship there, it tells you a lot. So I will send you a link to the article we have on how to find a good local bank. And one way to do this, Del, because it can be time consuming, is get together with a group of friends and do it together.
Right. All right. Well, and that's what I think, to finish this off, is this all driving us to understand a need of community? I mean, I feel like one of the beautiful things happening around me here in Texas, so many expatriates from California. We've all sort of run from California to New York. We find ourselves in Texas, but there is this community forming, and we are starting to, interact with each other, use each other's businesses. Do you think that that's going to be maybe the accidental thing that happens and maybe saves us, is recognizing the need for smaller community again?
Okay, so I want to tell one more story. When I was litigating with the federal government, it turned into a really brutal fight. And the other side did everything they could to shut off my income, shut off my credit, shut off my access to money in any respect. And when it happened, when the boom got lowered, one of the things I realized at that moment was I had gifted or loaned to friends and family $250,000. And over the next 11 years, my family and friends got together and said, well, I guess she needs the money back. And I had them either return, or I had a wealthy uncle who felt I'd helped other people, he would help me. And over the next 11 years, and I counted it up when it was over, I received back from them $250,000. And that's what kept me alive. Mm. And the other guys could never shut that money off because it was in the people bank. It was in the community bank. Mm. It was out there on the network. And so when people ask me, what do I invest in? I invest in people, because,
beautiful.
In the world we're going into, a civilization is built one great person at a time, one great child at a time. That's how you build a great civilization. And either we finance the world we want to live in, or we won't have it, because I assure you, Mr. Global is not going to finance it for us.
That's right. Brilliant words. I hope everyone out in the audience is taking that to heart. I know I am. We have got to start making a difference, and whether it's just using only dollars on Friday, but I think every time we pull out our wallets, we should feel a little bit of a win just by the fact that we use cash. I mean, those types of things I think get us through these dark times. We feel like we're not doing anything. Go to your ATM, grab a bunch of cash. It's going to make your wallet a little bit bigger. I'll have that like Costanza wallet, we call it. But at least when we throw down cash, we know we're making a difference. And certainly make sure you're a part of hashtag Cash Friday. Catherine Austin Fitts, you're a gem. You're fantastic. I hope we get to bring you on again and get into more details of what's going on.
And I would just tell everybody, do what I do. Remember to go give a little bit of that cash to ICANN and the Highwire. I think you're doing great work, and I want to support you completely.
Thank you very much. All right, take care, and we'll talk to you soon.